Welcome everyone. Good morning. My name is John Gessel. I'm our client relations coordinator here. I'm sure I've spoken with many of you at some point or other through Royalty Exchange. With me is Dayton O'Connor, our lead analyst.
Hey everybody.
We're going to be answering your submitted questions. We'll be answering any questions you have live. Again, as a reminder, please send all questions through the Q&A option rather than through the chat. We're not monitoring the chat, but we are monitoring the Q&A. It's a little bit easier for us to manage the questions. So we'll just dive in here and get started. Again, we're going to start with the submitted questions. So we'll slog through these, then open up the floor to any general questions. So first one we have here is asking for an update on exit strategies. I assume this is in relation to selling an asset you buy with us, which any asset you buy with us can be resold on the site. Normally that will cycle through what we call the exchange, which is just our general catalog of catalogs. But depending on the asset, where the royalties are coming from, it could also cycle through auction house. So yes, there are always liquidity options if you need them. Next one here is, are there any videos or basic intro information I can view in advance? That I would point you towards our investor guides. So we have an entire page that's just dedicated to intro guides, intro to royalty guides, anything you need to really get started and get a firm grasp of how royalties work. I'll point you there. I'll drop the investor guides link in our chat program here in a few minutes so that if any of you want access to it, you can just reach it there. It can be found through our blog page on the site too. It's kind of like our library of resources, so go there. Next one here. Are royalties considered securities by the US SEC? The assets on Royalty Exchange are not securities. These are one-to-one sales, so they don't qualify as securities. Dayton, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just to note at a high level, securities are financial instruments that are used to raise capital in public and private markets. What is reflected on our platform generally is the income right or IP related to music assets. So not in the same universe as securities.
Awesome. Next one here is, are the secondary market listings, for those of you who don't know, the secondary market is the exchange. It used to be called the secondary market. Are the secondary market listings complete on what is available for sale? I'm going to say yes. We do constantly update the exchange so that we can add new distribution entities, new assets, things like that. So, for now it's complete, but as we update it, more stuff will get added. So it's kind of an ongoing, evolving process. So yes and no there. Another one, are these investment securities, which we just discussed. Next one here, at what point is it worth paying to be in your higher level service? That is in reference to our all access membership. So there are a number of benefits with the all access membership, but one of the biggest ones is the cost savings that you can get because we do waive our buyer's fees, which of course is a scaling fee. So really the worth of it comes from how active you are in the market. If you're buying a lot of assets, it can be great because those $500 fees can add up quickly. And then if you ever wanted to resell, there's discounts there. Or if you're planning on buying just a handful of expensive assets, that can be worth it too. It's really only expensive the first year just to open the membership. After that, it's just $997 a year, so pretty affordable. But to start, it's got that $4,000 startup fee. So between the two, either if you're planning on buying a lot of assets or if you're planning on buying higher dollar point assets, that's really where it gets to get worth it. But of course, there are lots of other benefits that come with it, like private syndicate access, analyst benchmark pricing, things like that. So really depends on your strategy, but ultimately more active, more worth it. Next one here, can songs be submitted for use that are used in films? I'm going to assume this is like marketing the music that you purchase, and no. These are passive interests, so you do not have the authority to go and shop the song around to studios, things like that for placements. You don't have any say in that. That being said, if one of the songs in a catalog you buy were used in a movie or a commercial, something like that, you would see the upside from that. So oftentimes that's included in the assets. Always check the asset details just to make sure you understand what rights are included, because that can impact the windfall you'd see. But ultimately, no. you do not have the authority to shop the IP. Next one here. Can you pass ownership of royalties down? Yes. Treat them like any other asset. For this very reason, lots of investors will buy through a trust just to kind of manage the asset. So yes, you can hand them down. Next one here. Can you resell your royalties? Yes, you can. You can resell any asset you purchase on royalty exchange. Next one, how are multiples for a property established? Is there a formula? What is the highest multiple for investment if it makes sense financially? Dayton, you want to take that one?
Multiples in a property established in a formula. So we're on the multiples that are reflected in our pricing are driven by our model. And the inputs to our model are generally the historic earnings for the asset, the income mix, where that asset is making its money from, between different sources such as radio, streaming, film, TV, sync, as well as dollar age, the age of the asset. Assets with a higher dollar age are generally considered safer and higher value investment opportunities, given the fact that it is a higher probability that an older asset that has been earning for a longer period of time will continue to earn in the future for a longer period of time than a asset with a smaller dollar age. Multiples for a property established, it's based on the cash flows that we're forecasting for a given asset. Highest multiple for investment to make it sense financially. Again, that's dependent on how much money that particular asset is generating and how consistent that income is. If we're talking about older catalogs, stuff on our platform that is, maybe a dollar age of 10 or greater, that is having very consistent earnings from income streams that either are growing, such as streaming, or that we expect to continue to pay out over time because they relate to evergreen titles, then that is naturally going to command a higher multiple. And the multiple is just a function of the cash flows that are being generated by that future asset, what that corresponds to for pricing.
Awesome. Next one here, how are performance royalties tracked by PROs and how does that impact investment strategy? Dayton, you want to take this one? Dayton used to work at ASCAP actually, so he would know best.
Yeah. I used to work at ASCAP, and it's funny, I was there for a while, and I was talking to folks who are lifers of the organization. Used to be that ASCAP did a lot of their own performance tracking. There's an office in New York. They had at certain points they had floors to people that just had cans. They were listening to tracks that looked like were being recorded from the radio, like stacks and stacks of reels of tape deep. That doesn't happen anymore. What PROs do now, instead of having an army of people to listen to the radio all day, is they're either sourcing the performance information directly from the music user. So that's data that they're ingesting from sources like Spotify or Netflix. They're getting it directly from the source. Or they're contracting out with third parties that track the performances for them directly, such as Nielsen with respect to radio. In terms of how that impacts your investment strategy, I mean, the PROs are professionals at ingesting billions and trillions of lines of performances and processing them in a timely manner. Their royalties are really driven by what's in their repertory. They know what's being performed and where. It's just a function of what works are in their respective catalogs between ASCAP, BMI, CSAC in the US, the various PROs in other territories across the world, and also the licenses that they're negotiating with their music users, the value of which is generally driven by their catalog as well.
Great. Next one here, how can I buy copyrights? Typically, we don't include copyrights on Royalty Exchange. Normally, that kind of thing would be dealt with directly with the publisher or whoever the rights holder is. In some rare cases, we'll include assets that have copyrights. Pretty rare, but they do come up. But for that, you'd have to work directly with the rights holders. That's normally how that's handled. Next one here, how can I get a investor book material? Again, I'm pointing you to the guides. I put that link in the chat, so take a look at those guides. That would be the most helpful thing there. How can I invest or buy publishing rights for I'm going to assume this says single? I would say just look at the track lists. We include lots of assets that are just a single song. If you're looking for a specific song, let us know. We can always try and reach out to the artist to bring that IP to the marketplace. But beyond that, you'll have to search through the available assets to see if that song's included. Next one here, how can someone with low income invest in royalties? So this is a tricky question because low is a relative word. On the low end of royalty exchange, you should expect assets to transact somewhere in the 5,000 to 10,000 US dollar range. That's just what we end up seeing. In some rare cases, you'll see stuff that goes under the 5K mark. It is pretty rare. We had a slew of auctions at the start of this year that were in like the 1 to 2K range, and they ended up selling for like 5, 8K in a lot of cases. So it's just kind of the natural floor that we see. So expect that. And yeah, I don't have much more of an answer there. I mean, Dayton, do you have any suggestions to that?
No, nothing to add on that, John.
Okay, great. Next one here is a tax question. As we all know, we have to be very careful about the tax questions. So forgive us if our answers are a little bit short. How do I know what I owe in taxes and when? So when you buy an asset with us, you will sign a W-9. This is treated as simple income or ordinary income. So you will get a 1099 at tax time. That can be accessed through your payment hub, which is our admin portal. But any further questions around taxation, you should bring up with your tax advisor. Make sure you bring up amortization. We do have a snippet in our general site FAQ about amortizing for these assets. So look into that as well. Next one here, how do I register my songs in BMI so Royalty Exchange recognizes them? So this is more of a seller question than a buyer question. Being that you'd have to reach out with BMI and work with them directly. I mean, Dayton, I don't know if you have any additional insights to that.
Yeah, I mean that's on the seller side of this, but bear in mind for any assets that are being put onto our platform with respect to catalog sales, those titles are already registered with the respective sources.
Right.
So the seller is, reached out to, in this case, BMI, the PRO, registered their songs there, and it is by that registration that those songs are earning money, having that appear in the statement and being available for sale. So that's the passive nature of this asset, right? A lot of the work in terms of managing the catalog, like standing up the catalog, has already been done by the seller by the time that you acquire it, such that you're just collecting the income on the back end.
Great. Next one here, how do we see Royalty Exchange looking in the next 5 years? Well, probably a lot of the same, to be honest with you. Obviously, we're always looking to expand to include more royalty types, sizes, everything, but ultimately expect more volume. As we continue to grow, you'll see more assets coming to the site, more sizes for more genres, more places, things like that. So generally volume. But, again, like we mentioned earlier on this webinar, we're constantly evolving the marketplace so that, it best suits both buyers and sellers. So it's hard to say at this point what it's going to look like in 5 years, but one thing we can say for certain is there will be more volume. That's something that we're active on. Next one here. How do you see song catalog valuations affected by recent success of the Spotify appeal in 2018 to CRB rate increase pullbacks? So this is in relation to mechanical royalties. As I understand it, that rate has not yet been set. It's still kind of in negotiations, and the expectation is that mechanical royalties will increase. But again, we don't know. Nothing's set in stone yet. Dayton, do you have anything to add to that, the CRB?
No, I think that it's still a work in process, but that we do anticipate the mechanicals will go up in the future.
Perfect. Next one here, how does Royalty Exchange work? Again, I'm going to point you to our investor guides. We have actually a guide that breaks down the various markets and how they all work. How long does the process take when you win the bid? So the closing process is very quick. As I'm sure many of you know, we have a pretty strict 2 business day payment window for asset purchases, and you'll receive all contracts and payment information the same day as the closing. So you get all the documents very, very fast. Now from there, how long it takes you to start receiving payment can vary. It really depends on the entity overseeing the asset you bought and when their next distribution is. Now, sometimes that could be a long time. Most commonly, we see quarterly payments for these distribution entities, but some will pay biannually, some will even pay annually. So depending on when you bought your asset compared to when the next distribution is, could be a matter of days or it could be a year. It really, really depends. But ultimately, for the closing process, contracts, payment, just a couple of days. Next one here. How responsive are music royalties, especially streaming, to increasing inflation? Dayton, you want to take that one?
Sure. So it's a mixed bag, right? The asker, the questioner has called out streaming specifically. Those streaming sources would likely see their prices increase in response to inflation. As the basket is more expensive, so would the services like Spotify, Apple Music that users subscribe to. As they raise their fees, that's going to mean more revenue, and that is going to translate through into the royalty payout. That being said, there are many royalty sources, such as mechanicals, which are based on a statutory rate. Royalties from those sources or royalties that are paid out for music users whose license with whatever source relates to a fixed fee, those royalty assets would be devalued in the face of rising inflation.
Next one here. I would like to find out if this investment asset is available to European investors and if it is taxed at the source. So yes, this is available to European investors. We have lots of international investors. The way we'd handle that, that'd be different from a domestic investor in the US, is basically you'd sign a W-8 BEN to account for international tax withholding. As far as taxation goes, again, we have to be careful with this, but basically we would follow the rules of the tax treaty between your country and the US. So we would just follow whatever that is. Any more detail you'd like there, again, I'm afraid I have to point you to your tax advisor. Next one here. I'm young, 17, and I'm looking into different forms of income. Is royalty exchange a good way to invest? Yeah, if you're looking for a diversification or passive income asset, these are great for that. However, you do have to be at least 18 to buy assets on the site. So we'll see you next year. If I purchase royalty rights for a song, what is the process to receive monies made from those royalties? Are there other fees? So if you were to buy an asset, royalty exchange would administer the payments for that asset. It's one of the contracts you'll sign, is that accounting agreement. There are no additional fees for this. This administration service we provide is a free service. So basically what happens is after all the contracts are signed, payments received, you'll get an invitation to the Payment Hub portal, which is our admin portal. And that's where you'll specify all of your information for receiving payment. You can set your banking information there if you want to receive direct deposits. Plenty of investors opt for paper checks to get mailed to them, so you can opt for that. And then basically we'll pay you every time a distribution happens. Now we do hold a 30-day window on our accounting agreements to turn those payments around. That's just to make sure that there's no issues. Oftentimes we're taking a royalty distribution and disseminating payment between both the buyer and the seller of the asset. So there is a little bit of work that we have to do to make sure everything's accurate. And that way, if there is an issue, we still have time to fix everything, pay you what you're owed, and there's no issues. Now, in that portal, we'll also provide you financial statements. So you'll get ongoing performance data on your asset. You'll get tax information in there. So it becomes kind of like your general hub for your assets. Next one here. Is it possible to know how past winners have fared? For example, how has it been for them since winning? Any experiences to share? Dayton, you want to start with this one?
Yeah, apologies. I know I'm on mute. How's it been for them since winning? Yeah, we recently did an analysis taking a look at the average returns on an annual basis for the past year, and we find that it's tracking at about 10% on average, which is in line with the historic returns that we've seen, and that covers the 10-year term and life of rights assets that we have on our platform. And that's typically the type of returns that we would expect to see for these music assets. And there's been a lot of historic headwinds that drive the value of those royalties that we would likely continue to see in the future. There's been a lot of talk of streaming. Streaming came up with respect to inflation earlier in this chat. I was listening to the Warner Music Group earnings call just this past week, and they were mentioning how streaming was returning double digits on them. That's what we would expect to see. So a lot of those assets that are driven by streaming royalties, it is likely the case that you're going to continue to see growth from those income streams on a pretty significant basis, at least for the near future. Again, it's going to vary on a case-by-case basis depending on the asset. Royalties that are being driven by other sources that we would not expect to see the same kind of robust growth, such as radio, that are not transitioning over into those other consumption platforms. Those are going to be devalued over time. But John, I mean, you talk to a lot of our investors. I mean, generally, what's your take on their experience on this site?
Yeah, most people have good experiences because they, take the data in, make educated decisions based on the performance of the asset, how it's doing, so most people do pretty well. If you're looking for specific testimonials, there's a number of articles that have been written. There was a notable one in Forbes that talked to an investor. You may have seen it about Bodak Yellow. That's a really big one. But yeah, I mean, the proof's in the pudding. Around 10% return, most investors do pretty okay. But if you're curious to specific assets' ongoing performance, look at the exchange. We show the lifespan of the earnings of the asset there, as well as the purchase history. So you can always see how investment has done from its initial purchase, just through looking at the data there. We have all the raw data. We show year-over-year earnings. We show source earnings. So there's a ton to take away from there. So I'd say take a look at those as well. Next one here is on NFTs. Is Royalty Exchange interested in selling digital assets like NFTs in the future? Yeah, we're always looking to expand the platform. Obviously, NFTs have been making a really big splash in the IP world. So yeah, it's something that we're watching closely. We'd love to include them. So we'll see. Next one here. Is there a limit amount of royalties to purchase? No. You can buy as many assets as you want. If you had deep enough pockets, you could buy all the assets on the site if you can. We don't have any limitations, really. It's whatever you want to do or can do. Is there an entry fee? Can I do this as an individual? How exactly is investors paid? There is no entry fee. Creating an account is free. The only time you pay a fee is when you actually buy an asset. Again, our buyer's fee, like we mentioned earlier, the greater between $500 or 1%. So that really only changes if you're spending more than $50,000 on an asset, but yeah, free to do it. You can invest as an individual or an entity. Either one will work. And we also already went over how investors get paid. Next one here, is there another pooled fund coming to existence or options for small investors with only 5 to 10K to invest? Not at this time from us. Again, like we mentioned earlier, you can find assets in that 5 to 10K range. But nothing specific on a timeline like a private syndicate, which is what I think that question is in relation to. So no fund style assets or anything like that. Next one here, please explain dollar age and the benefit of a lower versus higher or vice versa. Dayton, you want to start with this one?
Sure. So dollar age at a high level, that reflects it's a weighted average that reflects the age of a music catalog. And dollar age is one of the key components that we evaluate when we're pricing these assets. The dollar age, that really defines, in our view, a lot of the value for these assets. We've covered this earlier in this chat. The older the dollar age, the higher that age of a catalog, the more valuable that catalog is expected to be, given the probability that it's going to continue to earn at a high level in the future relative to younger catalogs. In other words, by way of example, a catalog that's been earning for 10 years, it's more likely to continue to earn into the future than a catalog that's only been earning for 2 or 3 years, because that older catalog has already been validated by the market as having some kind of recurring value, right? It's got listeners, it's being consumed, so it's more likely to continue to be consumed at a certain level than a younger catalog that may not have entered into the canon yet. The benefits of a lower versus higher, vice versa, with value, a higher dollar age, those are more expensive assets. So lower dollar ages typically are going to be priced a a little bit lower, and that may represent some opportunity if you're investing in those, but it also carries more risk than if you're investing in a older dollar age catalog.
Perfect. Perfect. Next one here. What are some ways we can increase the yearly return? Remember, these are passive. You don't have the control or the authority to market the assets. I've heard some creative strategies from investors in the past about how they might be able to impact the revenue based on plays. Some people have talked about building and marketing playlists that include some of the IP that they've purchased. I talked to this one guy who was a club owner, and he owned many nightclubs, and his plan was to buy pop catalogs and play them frequently in his nightclubs. So, really anything that you do, as long as you're not breaching copyright, go for it. The impact that you'll see, it's hard to say. You need to do a lot of plays to really move the needle for royalty assets. But ultimately, from a copyright authority standpoint, there's nothing you can do. But that's not to say that it's impossible, like I mentioned. So yeah, just remember these are designed to be passive. Next one here, what are the benefits of investing in music and television royalties? Aside from the fact that it's just uncorrelated passive income, I'd say it'd be the same as any regular asset. Dayton, anything you want to add to that?
I imagine that this is probably broad, like covering not just music and television royalties, but the entire market. And to John's point, this is an opportunity to buy into an asset that is going to give you most likely some kind of consistent yield that represents a passive source of income that's largely uncorrelated from what's happening in the broader market. The nuances within music and television for the more valuable assets for the higher dollar age, I find they perform pretty similarly. Music that continues to be consumed on radio and streaming services that has been for some time, similar to that kind of performance with television. Bear in mind that there's different risks you do have to evaluate when you're looking at music versus TV assets. Like a song on the radio is getting played because it's being programmed into a playlist. A television royalty is likely based on either theming cues that are embedded into a program that will be paid out on, provided that program is on the air, or they relate to some kind of synchronization royalty, which would represent a significant but non-recurring payment. Again, when you're looking at any of these assets on our platform, make sure that you're looking to see what makes up that particular asset and evaluate the potential risks in terms of performance and income streams before you submit your bids.
Great. So there's one here on the auction process. Again, point you to the guides. One of the guides specifically on the auction process, but quickly, a couple things about the auctions to take note of. First one is it's a guaranteed sale compared to the exchange, where you make offers and maybe you get a deal, maybe you don't. Auction house, always a sale. Highest bidder wins, traditional auction. We do have a protective measure with the auctions that it's good to be aware of. This is to prevent auction sniping, most notably. So if anyone places a bid within the last 5 minutes of one of our auctions, it will actually reset that auction's timer back to 5 minutes. So that will extend the auction past its scheduled ending time. But it also ensures that anytime you get outbid for an asset, especially in the closing minutes where there's a lot of traffic, you always have a fair shot to bid back and stay competitive for that asset. You can also place proxy bids where you say you had a price ceiling, but the price wasn't there yet. Well, you could just bid that price ceiling amount, and then the proxy system will automatically bid on your behalf by the bidding increment until your proxy limit is reached. So you can do that as well. So just a couple of things to take note of there. As far as general process and things like that, again, take a look at those guides. That'll be the most helpful. What are the most popular genres / artists that have annual royalties that pay back the money you received and more? We can't really answer this. Every asset sells, really. It's a pretty rare case where something doesn't get any bids or doesn't sell or anything like that. So really it's up to what you like. I wouldn't say there's a favorite genre among investors. I mean, really, again, because everything sells. Obviously, the higher profile artists tend to be more sought after just because it's a more recognizable brand name. But yeah, I mean, I don't have much else to add to that. I mean, Dayton, any other thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of payback, it's really just a question of what the time horizon you're looking at, right? 10-year asset, you'd expect that, it's going to pay back and provide you some additional return over the 10-year term. The life of rights, you're collecting that over an indefinite period of time. In terms of popular genres / artists that have annual royalties, to John's point, we have a mix of assets that are available on the platform. There's not really one that sticks out to me as driving more investor interest, but I think it's generally understood that streaming royalties, catalogs that are generating a lot of their performances from platforms like Spotify, Apple Music, you'd expect to see that there is growth in those digital royalties over time relative to other music performance income streams. So if you're interested in having a higher likelihood of return, look for catalogs and assets that look like they're very highly indexed on streaming.
Great. Next one here is another tax question. What are the tax implications / treatment of this type of investment? Any advantages or disadvantages? Again, tax question we got to be really careful with. I'll point you back to amortization. That's probably going to be the best thing for you to take a look at in regards to taking advantage of the income. I'll put a link in the chat in a moment here to a blog post on amortizing royalties and how that works. So that should be helpful. What are your fees to the buyer? Buyer's fee is very simple. It's a greater between $500 or 1% of the final asset sale price, whichever is higher. So that's standard for every deal. Next one here. What criteria determines which artists are selected for auction? So for auction, it will really be any asset that can't get listed to the exchange. So it's kind of in special cases that we do auctions. Normally that'd be things that are like off music. So many of you may remember the Listerine royalties we had several months ago, or any film or television royalties, book publishing, things like that. That will cycle through the auction house. If we do one of our irregular assets in the fixed return, since that's not a traditional 10-year deal or life of rights deal, that would cycle through the auction house. So really depending on the payor of the royalties and the asset type is kind of how we delineate there. Of course, there's a specific request from a seller to go through the auction house. Of course, we'll take that into account. But typically it's dependent on the entity providing the royalty payments. Next one here. What insurance do I have that this site is legitimate? Well, I mean, we've been in business for over 5 years. You can find articles on us in the New York Times and Forbes, Wall Street Journal. We were recently listed to Fast Company's most innovative companies. I mean, take your pick. Done over 1,000 transactions, done millions of dollars in sales. I mean, I'm not sure what else to provide you to let you know that we're legitimate. What is the average percentage return on an individual purchase versus a share of a SPV, which special purpose vehicle? I mean, we already talked on the returns a bit, but Dayton, anything to add to that specific question?
No, I would point back to the approximate 10% that we called out earlier in the chat.
Great. Next one here. What is the average annual ROI? How are the income streams taxed, ordinary income or long-term? What are the frequency of payments? We already answered all of these. Average ROI, again, around 10%, like Dayton just said. Taxation, this is ordinary income. So any tax questions there, bring to your tax advisor. What are the frequency of payments? Depends on the asset and which entity is providing the payments. So again, some are quarterly, some are annually, some are biannually. Normally we'll include a note on an asset listing that specifies distribution frequency. So I'd say take a look at that. What is the difference between publishing and writer's royalties? Dayton, you want to dive into that?
Yeah, so there might be differences within a catalog between what's getting paid to the publisher of a title or a catalog and the writer, but the royalties that are being directed to writers and publishers generally come from the three same sources. There's the mechanical royalty that comes from Harry Fox. We've discussed that's that 9.1 cent statutory rate for mechanical and digital reproductions of music compositions. There's the performance royalties, which is paid by the PROs that goes to the writer and publisher on a given work. And then there's the synchronization fees. The sync fees are split between the writer and publisher, and those are one-time fees used for the synchronization of a work into an audiovisual context.
Perfect. All right, moving on here. What tax form is used for this type of investment? We've already answered that a couple times. Take a look at that. What is the minimum bid? That depends on the asset. Depending on where the starting bid is, and the bidding increment also will vary depending on the asset. So that one depends on the asset. Again, what's the minimum here? Pricing, 5 to 10K is what you should expect. Bid amount varies. Where should I begin if I'm just starting out? Take a look at those investor guides. We've linked them in the chat. That's going to be the best way to get a handle on how everything works. All those guides are pretty comprehensive. Next one here, which royalties typically produce the longest reliable payment? In our experience, it's the older catalogs. We do see the Lindy effect in play with these, which basically what the Lindy effect is. As long as something has been earning, it's feasible to expect it to continue earning for that same period. So when we see catalogs earning for 20, 30 years, it's pretty feasible to expect that to continue to earn for another 20 to 30 years. So older catalogs show consistency. Those are people's tastes that are pretty solidified, so pretty consistent earnings there. Dayton, anything to add to the longest?
The longest reliable payment, again, it's a function of dollar age, as John mentioned. The older it is, the more likely it's going to continue to earn. All of like the classic Christmas canon that's been around, since like the Irving Berlin days, you're going to continue to hear those songs, on the radio and streaming services forever. And this is the flip side of that risk. A younger song in a younger catalog, there's no guarantee that a song that came out in 2019, 2020, 2021 is going to have that same kind of long, reliable payment because it's already paid. It's just recently paid out for its peak performances. It's most likely coming off that sort of peak plateau and is trending down and hasn't necessarily reached that point in its life cycle where it's going to start, seeing those long tail distributions, that sort of consistent, level of performance and consumption that's going to carry on for an indefinite basis.
All right. Next one here. Why haven't royalties been as visible of an alternative asset class? That's because there has never been a market. I mean, royalty exchange is really the first open market for royalties. Prior to us, any royalty sale was a closed door backroom deal between executives and an artist or music industry insiders or whoever. So short answer there is because there was no option. So yeah, I mean, Dayton, anything to add to that?
Mm-mm.
Perfect. Next one here. Will most royalties still continue to turn profits past the 20-year mark? Again, relates to dollar age. Depends on the asset, depends how the earnings are looking, how consistent they are. Dollar age will be what you want to look for. I mean, it's a kind of a big guiding vein for a lot of these assets. So make sure you've got a good handle on that. Next one here. Will you prepare any tax documents associated with my royalty income? You'll get a 1099. That will outline the income you've received from us. So in short, yes, you will get that just based on the W-9 you signed. And that covers it for the submitted questions. So we'll start diving into these live ones here. I've got a handful of these. First one here. Can I buy a royalty with friends? Can we split it? So directly on royalty exchange, no, they are one-for-one transactions, right? So you and a few friends can't be co-signers on a purchase agreement because they're one-for-one contracts. However, you can purchase using an entity. There are several investors on the site who have an LLC with a couple of people and they share assets through their LLC. Now, the LLC acts as the single owner of the asset, but since they're all shareholders in the LLC, then they can disseminate payment that way. So with us directly, has to be a 1-for-1, but there are ways to work around it so that you can share the royalty income among a couple people. Next one here, how do you collect royalties in order to distribute to investors? So basically what happens here is royalty exchange gets set up with the royalty payor as an administrator on the royalty account. So the royalty payment for that account gets sent to us, and then we disseminate that payment between investors and sellers and things like that. Roughly, it's how it works. Next one here, once a standing order is met and an offer is made, how long does it take to be informed if the asset owner accepted or not? Is there a limit on their end to make up their minds? Great question. So the standing orders, for those of you that don't know, is our automated investing feature where you specify earnings metrics for catalogs you'd be interested in buying. And as we run valuations and analyze catalogs, if we ever find a match, make an offer on your behalf. Now, when an offer is made via a standing order, if it's made on the exchange, then it's the standard 24-hour window that the seller has to respond. If it's made directly to the asset owner, I believe they have a 2-hour window to respond to that. So that way your funds aren't tied up. So they do have a limited period to respond. But when you get notified of a confirmed transaction, that time period can vary. Because if it's a originating asset on the site, it still has to go through our standard due diligence process. We have to make sure it's a legitimate asset. So just because you match to a valuation doesn't mean it's a guaranteed sale. We do see these fail from time to time if something looks funny with the earnings, or it's a extra volatile catalog or something like that that doesn't fit really with royalty exchange. So that time period can vary. Next one here, can you describe royalty exchange growth ever since the start? I don't think Dayton or I really could. I've only been here a couple of years. Dayton's only been here about a year. If Rob were here, many of you know Rob Bernhardt, our corporate counsel. He's been here since the beginning. He could probably answer that best. But growth has been good. I mean, year over year, we see pretty consistent growth to the platform, the site, transactions, all of that. I'm afraid I can't be much more specific than that. Next one here, can I sell 10 years of royalty income from a life of rights catalog, and what's the fee? Yes, you can do a limited term sale in a life asset that you own. That is totally fine. The fee that you would pay would depend on the medium of sale. So if we were selling through the auction house, your fee would be 15% of the final asset sale price. If you were selling through the exchange, that should be an 8% final asset sale price fee. So it depends. Next one here, who are your competitors in the US and Europe? I mean, there are a handful of markets out there, but I'm not sure I would qualify any of them as real competitors. As far as like an open, transparent marketplace, no one I've seen really compares to Royalty Exchange. We have not only a ton of assets, the widest inventory of assets, but also more information on each asset than you would find on anyone else that I've seen. I mean, Dayton, do you have anything to add to that one about competitors? I mean,
in terms of competitors, I mean, there are obviously other third parties and players in this space that will do financial transactions for music royalties. There's no one who has the same kind of model, as far as I'm aware, as Royalty Exchange in terms of standing up a platform that connects buyers and sellers in this manner. But there are brokers that operate in this space that do these kind of catalog transactions. I'm sure a lot of people on the call are familiar with companies like Hypnosis, Songs that have done these kinds of catalog sales at the top end of the market, and obviously music publishers are also very active in the acquisition space as well. But in terms of direct competition for a similarly situated product in the marketplace, I'm not aware of another firm like Royalty Exchange.
Yeah,
I could be wrong.
This next question here would be one of the people I would kind of consider a competitor. It's about Songvest. What is the difference between you and Songvest? Who is Sean Peace? Again, Songvest is one of those that, like, I guess you might consider them a competitor in that they are a platform for buying music royalties. But again, as far as inventory goes, transparency, asset quality don't really compare. Sean Peace used to work at Royalty Exchange years and years and years ago. I never met him, but I believe on his site he says that he was like a founder or something of the original Royalty Exchange, which I'm not sure how, like what the situation is with that. I wasn't here for it. But yeah, again, as far as competition goes, they just don't really hold up. Like they have an asset or two here or there, but really it's just not the same inventory, not the same size, scope, quality, any of that. So next one, will you be sharing a link to this recording? Yes, we publish all of these. They're visible on the site, on the blog page. Again, through those investor resources, you should be able to find all of the webinars we've done. All of these monthly ones are all visible there. Next one here, do you accept crypto as payment? No, we do not. We do not accept cryptocurrency. Payment must be made via wire transfer. In some cases, we can include ACH payment options, but you should expect wire transfer. I'm sorry I missed this question. Can I buy a royalty with friends? Can we split? Yes and no. Directly with Royalty Exchange, you cannot. They're one-for-one transactions, but we do see people using entities. So, if you wanted to open an LLC with some friends and then purchase assets using that LLC, that could be a way that you could end up splitting assets. But ultimately, it is a one-for-one transaction between the seller and the buyer, whether that's an entity or an individual. Okay, so that covers the Q&A. If you guys have other questions, please feel free to send them in to us. Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything else to add. Dayton, you have anything else to add here?
No, I think this has been a great conversation.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, again, my name is John Gestel. I am our client relations coordinator here. With me is Dayton O'Connor, who is our lead analyst. Thank you all for coming. We really appreciate you guys taking the time, your interest, and hopefully these questions helped. If there's something that we didn't get to, again, please do send them in to us. We are very, very accessible and always happy to help. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And you guys all have a good rest of your days. We'll be here, just get more assets for you. Alrighty. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.